I'm just waiting for 11. All right, hello everybody. My name is Chad. This is going to be my talk, The Art of Adaptations. First, I'd like to go over who I am. I am a local content creator and hobbyist. I've been doing YouTube on and off, won't lie, kind of off more than on recently, for about 5 or 6 years. And then I've just been someone who's really passionate and loved games and movies as an art form for a pretty long time. Like I said, on YouTube. My channel is Entertainment Lives On. It's a channel that talks about media of all types, whether it be like, reviews, podcasts, video essay, whatever. Try and make a fresh take or at least bring something interesting to the table to make sure people have, worthwhile content that they're consuming. And then I'm a returning speaker from last year. I did a talk called Open World Litmus Test. This was testing open world game design and seeing how it holds up. I have a QR code for anybody who'd want to take that down. If not, that's fine. I'll leave it up for about, 30 seconds here. All right. So yeah, the art of adaptation. That's the whole idea today. And today we're going to be looking at ways one can adapt video games to a movie or show. What's going to go into that? How to find the right fit for your adaptation, what kind of adaptation you want to do, that sort of thing. And then, of course, we're going to go over what to avoid when making an adaptation, the kind of stuff that you want to watch out for that could possibly lead to a, not as good result. Why am I talking about this now? First, video game properties are being adapted way more now than they ever been. Sure, they've been adapted since, mid to late 80s with like the Mario Bros. Movies and stuff like that, but we've seen a real big uptick and surge of them recently. Partly that is because the quality of these budgets for shows, quality and budgets of these shows have been going up quite a bit, which is really nice. It's making it so where, we get higher quality, bigger budget shows that feel like they are delivering on products rather than trying to make a buck. And then, of course, an increase in general audience demand for these adaptations because of the higher quality and higher budget. Whether it be something like the Mario Bros. Movie or the Castlevania show in the animated format, or more live action fronts like the Last of Us show or the Fallout show. These are just kind of becoming popular and people are really wanting to see them and interested in them rather than, oh gosh, another video game adaptation. What's going to happen now? First, we need to talk about when doing an adaptation is really what makes games special as a medium. We want, if we're going to adapt something, we should learn why that piece of medium is even good in the first place. The first is interactivity. There's physical interaction, which is, your very typical way you're interacting with the game. It's how you control it. This is stuff like playing with a controller, motion controls, or doing VR if you want more complicated movements. Then you have your digital interactions. This is stuff like how you interact inside the game, what you're going to do inside the game while playing. This can be something as simple as running and jumping in Mario, something a little bit more complex like in survival games where you're cutting down trees and breaking rocks like in Valheim here, or something really complicated like making a redstone complex in Minecraft. It's just really how whatever you're doing in a game is physical or digital interaction. The second big thing that games have for them is freedom and choice. And there's 3 types of freedom and choice. The first is intuitive. This is going to be your stuff like choosing a class and leveling up and choosing skills. This is going to be stuff like making a character and designing it. And then, of course, the last will be like a loadout and what guns you're using. Intuitive freedom is kind of things you're just going to naturally want to do as someone playing the game. It's not going to be something you really have to think about or put in detail. It's just going to be stuff that players are naturally attracted to. Second type of freedom and choice is movement and exploration. This is, you're, going around in an open world, finding different locations, such as something in like Skyrim, going around an arena and like a shooting arena like in Doom, and which way you want to take out enemies and take things out, and who you're going to take out first, things, that sort of thing. Then, of course, last is literal movement of like what type of vehicles you're using, how you're traversing the world, things like that. And the last of freedom and choice is, of course, the most obvious one, which is narrative and character. It's going to be stuff like in Elden Ring, where you have different endings to quests and different, endings to the game. Something maybe a little bit more complex, like in Mass Effect, where you have like a morality meter and you have good choices and bad choices. Or then, of course, you have stuff like the Walking Dead franchise, the Telltale series, where they build the whole game around choices and narrative matter. The narrative choices. The last thing that games do that are really important, that I think gets a lot of it gets undercredited quite a bit, is blending media. This is mixing games with other entertainment while not making it feel, lack of a better word, while not making it feel removing the player from the experience. So this can be stuff like cutscenes from like your God of War games and your Persona games, where you're just watching the story unfold and having some time between, fighting and stuff. This can also be things like audio logs, which are kind of like an homage to your podcasts and radio dramas, where stuff like in Rapture, where you're getting to hear all the different citizens of Rapture and what's going on there. And of course, Arkham City Asylum, where you get to hear the warden's logs and what's going on with everything happening there. And then last is journals and written logs. Something like everything that happens with Ishmael in the sewers, when you're going through there and learning about, what happened to this like town that he created and stuff like that underground. Or something like Fallout New Vegas, where you're going into vaults and reading on the vault terminals the stories. The reason why I think this is a really important thing to bring up as games as an art form is because I don't know any movie or show where it'll stop and ask me to read a 5-paragraph little story about something and it feels like I'm still immersed in the experience. Games are able to really do that because of the player interaction. It's able to slow down the experience and let you do things different ways that movies, shows don't really allow. So now we're going to take that knowledge of what we just learned about what games as a media are and using them what we've learned for adaptations. First thing we need to go over is that it's not going to be possible with all games. Not every game can be adapted. It's just kind of not possible. These are things like Guitar Hero, puzzle games like Witness and Portal, and your Euro Truck Simulator, your simulator games. These are games that kind of in their essence are about player experience and like player discovery. So the main aspect of those games are going to be removed and taken from them, and that would just leave a little bit more of a hollow experience. Sure, with something maybe like Portal, you could do like a story of those characters, but like the core, aspect of those games is kind of, getting to feel the gratification of figuring something out yourself. And if those are gone, then, that kind of removes the purpose of those experiences. Second is transitioning experiences. You want stuff to feel similar in tone, You want something like Last of Us to feel like the Last of Us show. What you don't want is like an espionage stealth game like Hitman to turn into some superhero romp like an Agent 47. You want to make sure the tone that is going into the experience is fitting and make sure it feels right. And then last is use what is already there. Whether it be audio logs or character development or lore, great examples is the Fallout show and the Cyberpunk Edge Runner show. They kind of built upon this world and kind of pre-set up establishments rather than trying to change the world, things like that. Kind of fitting everything into the world a little bit nicer helps than, just going straight for doing something completely different with how things work. So now we're going to talk about what type of story we can tell with adaptations. First is a direct adaptation. These are translating the literal story of the game to a show or movie, so the same exact story. This would be stuff like The Last of Us show, that is, retelling The Last of Us 1 game story. Silent Hill 1, or Silent Hill the movie, is telling Silent Hill 1's story. And then, of course, most recently, Five Nights at Freddy's. The movie is kind of trying to tell their own version of the Five Nights at Freddy's stuff. So this is just directly adapting those types of stories rather than not doing that. There are some pros to this. The first main pro is you already have a lot to pull from. When you're writing and people in the writer's room, you kind of already have like a template to follow and what kind of things are going on. Next is new audience appeal. This is something that people who have not played the series or experienced these stories before, they will be more interested in experiencing this to a certain degree because of the fact that they don't have to feel the pressure of already playing something or already understanding the lore of the world. And then last is original creators are usually on board with this. So, if you're keeping the story intact, or for the most part intact, a lot of original creators aren't going to feel like things are getting disrupted or bothered. Cons to this is less creative freedom. The people who are going to be working on this project, directing it, writing it, whatever, are going to have a lot less creative freedom, so it might seem less appealing to them because they don't get to put their touch on the piece of art and the piece of media that they're doing. Second con is it's potentially upsetting the fan base. You change one little thing in the lore or something like that when you do a direct adaptation, or this character isn't handled as well as a different character, people will get upset, and that's just unfortunately a reality of that. Then last is there's a lot of lost in translation. There are certain moments in stories and games that, like I was talking about earlier, that you can't really translate because of interactivity and stuff like that. So if you're doing a direct story, it's really hard to, make sure that exact experience is getting translated over to a movie or a show. Second is non-direct adaptations. This is telling a story in the game's world, or taking a game that doesn't really have a story and giving it a story. This can be stuff like the Fallout show, Cyberpunk Edgerunners, and again, Castlevania. All of these are great examples of either just telling a story in that world, or in Castlevania's sense, that was Castlevania 3 they were pulling from. And that game doesn't have a story. Essentially, it's just go kill Dracula. Besides that, they're making a story around that. So the pros to this non-direct adaptation is creative freedom. First and foremost, a lot of creators who are going to come on are going to feel like they can do a lot more with this, tell their own stories, have their own character arcs, things like that, stuff that you're not going to see in a direct adaptation. You're going to have less comparison. You're not going to have fan base splitting hairs over, oh, this character wasn't handled like they were in the game, so I feel upset about this, that sort of thing. People are going to be a lot more on board because it's just a new story in that world, rather than having to compare how they handled everything from the original game story. Low risk, high reward. What this essentially means is people who are going to want to, pitch this to studios and things like that, it's going to be a lot less of a risk if this does poorly. It's not going to feel like it's ruining that, world, that story, whatever. But it's also high reward because if it does pay off, look at something like the Fallout show, where after it came out, people didn't stop talking about it for months. People really liked it, enjoyed it, memed the crap out of it. It was a very popular show. Last pro is it's really good for newcomers and fans both. So you get the fan aspect of fans get to experience a new story in the world and just get to have, something they've not experienced before. But it's also pretty good for newcomers as well, because since it's its own story, it's already going to establish these characters and stuff up, and not relying on you knowing anything about the world kind of previously when you go into it, or trying to speed run characters because, they'll be like, oh, they know who, Tess is from Last of Us. We don't have to elaborate her character or something like that. The cons to this. Tougher pitch. When you're going to pitch this to like a studio or something like that, it's very hard to say like, hey, this story that I want to tell that's not directly involving anything else is really cool and it's in this world, take it, rather than saying, hey, this story in this game was really good, this will be a really good movie or a really good show. Other con is potentially upsets fans. I put this in here kind of as a joke, but in all honesty, you're not going to avoid upsetting a fan base when you do any kind of adaptations. Fans usually just get upset with anything nowadays. Look at Star Wars, for instance. There's always someone unhappy about some sort of adaptation or some sort of new show or something with Star Wars, that sort of stuff. And then, it's less popular. There's a chance that, everyone knows about Fallout here on this list, but I would say, especially Cyberpunk Edgerunners and Castlevania to a certain degree, these shows aren't talked about as much when it comes to adaptations because they're not, the big thing. They're not telling the exact story, so they just sometimes go under the radar more. Next thing we got to talk about is, are we going to do a movie or are we going to do a series? It's really time to look to see what's going to be a better fit for what. So down here we have our TV series and our movies. First, we're going to go over direct adaptations. And almost always, without a doubt, direct adaptations are going to go to a TV series. Like, just because game stories are usually so long, most of them at minimum are like 6 to 8 hours long. You're not going to cram that into a 2 or 3 hour movie. It's just not going to work as an adaptation. The only exception to this is something small scale. So like if you were going to, let's say Hotline Miami, for instance, as an indie game, only like story-wise, that only has like 2 hours, maybe max worth of story. You can put that into a movie, but everything else will probably be TV series. And when it comes to a non-direct adaptation, we have to break it into two different sections, which is large scale and small scale. Your small scale is going to be like your Mortal Kombat movies, for instance, where it's like, oh, hey, we just want a bunch of people fighting each other and beating the crap out of each other. That's small scale. That makes, that's something smaller. Or if you're going to focus on one specific character, where large scale is like you want to do multiple character vignettes, you want to have a big world you're exploring, things like that. Large scale, again, always going to go to TV series. I mean, it's pretty obvious in that sense, but like think about the Fallout show. There's like four different main characters we're following, and they have their own like slow realization of what's going on and things they discover. And then you have small scale would be movie. So like I said, with that Mortal Kombat example I gave earlier, if you're going to do like a fighting, just a thing that's all about the action and coolness, you're just going to do that into a movie. Next is finding the right people. This is going to be like how to pick your writers, directors, producers, things like that. There's three big things I want to focus on here. First is never just for a paycheck. You don't want to pick your Paul W.S. Andersons or your Uwe Balls, these people who are, known for just making really schlocky movies that don't really care about the lore or the world. They're there just for a paycheck. And, you also don't want to threaten to box your fan, someone who says your movie's bad. That's just not good practice, right? Making sure you find the right fit is the other one. Eli Roth, for instance, known for being a slasher director, making a bunch of bloody movies that are about, taking out people and just that kind of like bloody pulp horror. Why somebody thought it was a good idea to make him direct an action comedy movie, I don't know, but let's, try to find the directors that are going to fit, the image we're going for, rather than like trying to take someone who is willing to do it and just putting them onto it. And then last is passionate producers. These are people like your Fred Sieberts, who's worked on multiple Cartoon Network stuff, things like that, as well as the Castlevania show, and Jonathan Nolan, who co-wrote and produced the Fallout show, amongst other things as well. You want to find these producers who are not only going to keep things on track, but also know how to try and help the directors and writers get the vision they want out of it, rather than trying to say, no, we need to do it in this time, this paycheck, this amount of money, X, Y, and Z sort of stuff. Last, I have some extra thoughts here that I want to go over that I wasn't able to add into anywhere, just it doesn't fit nicely. But these are still good points regardless. First is animation is always an option. Look at the Mario Bros. Movie. Again, I go back to it, but the original Mario Bros. Movie back in the 80s was kind of a mess of a movie, and partially I feel like that is because that world is not really good for live action. It's so wacky and zany and over the top that it just doesn't fit. So sometimes doing an animated option is good. Second, don't only rely on references. It's not a good idea. Castlevania is a great example of this, where they have like little references to enemies and maybe use like reprise music from the games and stuff, but it never feels in your face. It never feels really like, hey guys, remember this? Remember this? It's a great thing to know that like you want to make sure it feels like a good experience and not just you're calling out to the fan base. Then last is keep the original tone and feel. I know I said this earlier, but it is extremely important. Look at the Fallout show, for instance. I think they did a really good job with this show just because that tone is really weird in the sense of it's both dark humor and also tragedy in a lot of ways. But like the fact that they made it so where those two things work together really well is really cool. And I think it's really important for shows and movies to do that because you don't want to miss the whole feel of those kinds of experiences when you're translating them. So next, we're going to make an adaptation. I chose Deep Rock Galactic just because I thought it would be a fun choice. So we'll go over a lot of things. We're going to talk about what we've learned and apply it. And I'm going to go over a bunch of points here about Deep Rock Galactic. First, this is a class-based first-person horde shooter playing as dwarven miners in space. There's like alien spiders and stuff you fight like that. It's, think Left 4 Dead with some RPG elements in space as dwarves. Very weird, but very fun. Each class has very different personality and utilities for getting out of a bind. So you already have this like pre-established set-in context of different characters with different unique aspects. Next, you have a unique mix of blending aspects from fantasy and science fiction together. So, space is familiar, dwarves is familiar, But putting them together makes something kind of new, but that also still makes it approachable for a lot of different people. So it's not like a really out there concept that you could still make popular. A good sense of humor and tension built into the game. You know, there's a bunch of humor and jokes going on, but then when stuff really gets down to the nitty gritty and you're having to survive, it gets pretty tense in the game. And I think that works for a movie and we could or a show and we can do that. And last, it's very light on actual story and it's good for adding more to the IP. The fact that there's not really a story to Deep Rock, it's just, hey, go mine stuff, means that you can add kind of your own flair and own little homages and stories to it in the world. So my pitch is Deep Rock the movie. This would be a group of freshly hired miners are going in to mine stuff, and they're told by mission control that there is a slight pest problem, but it's no big deal. And if they want to leave, they have to get the resources they want. Well, once they get down there, they realize this not big deal of a pest control is nothing but, and it's really intense. So now they thought they were going to be there for an easy mission, but they're now fighting for their lives trying to escape, but they can't leave unless they get what they need. Pitch for this would essentially be it's an action thriller with some humor in it. The tone of the movie would start off lighthearted, and it would get serious as things worsen in the story. Think Aliens plus Guardians of the Galaxy. Just a mix between fun, pulpy characters, kind of getting into this crazy action horror setting, and stuff gets more intense as time goes on. Because of this, I feel like the director should be James Gunn. He is very good at telling a story that is both funny and serious. And because of that, he could, I think, write the story really well. The writers would be both James Gunn and Christina Hodson. Christina Hodson's a writer both on the Bumblebee movie and Birds of Prey. So just she knows both the serious and humor and also has had worked with science fiction stuff. So finding a writer that's good for that fit there. And then last, the producer would be Charles Roven. Charles Roven's worked with James Gunn on multiple things before, and he works a lot with Warner Brothers in general and has done a lot of high quality, movies. So he's just a good fit that would take things seriously, but also make sure the directors and writers are kept in mind when making the aspect. Yeah, that was my pitch, and here's the wrap. I hope you have a better understanding for what goes into making an adaptation from games, things like that. I also hope you guys have an idea of what to look at when an adaptation releases, like kind of maybe looking into, who's making it, who's writing on it, things like that. Look for certain things to understand who's going on it to kind of better gauge what kind of product we're getting in the end. And then last, thank you. Thanks for listening and experiencing the time. Here on my left, I have a QR code for my YouTube channel, and then here to the right is the QR code for the presentation itself. At this point, questions. Anyone have any questions or anything like that? Yeah.
How do you feel sort of less blockbustery media forms like a graphic novel, novelizations, or like a radio show kind of thing would benefit from some of the advice presented here?
So the question was about graphic novelization and translating this advice to something more of like a graphic novel, radio show, things like that. And that's a really good question. I would say the best thing to do in that situation is some of this stuff would apply, but this is predominantly focusing on movies and shows. There are certain things that you can do in a book or a graphic novel or in a radio show that you can't really do in movies, especially when it comes to like producers and things like that. Certain things like that aren't going to apply nearly as much. Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah. So the question was if I have any examples of adaptations done very poorly. And I would say, personally, I feel that yes, the Assassin's Creed movie's done poorly. I haven't seen it, but I saw someone do like a synopsis of it. It seemed awful. The Borderlands movie's pretty bad. The Monster Hunter movie I did see, and that was particularly really bad because it just completely did not understand the aspect of Monster Hunter as a product. And it was like, oh, we're going to put military shooters into a foreign world where they're shooting at big monsters rather than like the idea of learning how to be a hunter and grind through things. It was very bizarre. Yeah, that's very crazy. Any other questions? All right. Well, again, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you coming. And that's it.